Okay, thank you for making time to come out here on this not too cold night, I don't think, so that's great. So the subject is church and state, and I've entitled it a history, okay, because it's a huge subject. And I'll just, if I can make the thing work. Hang on, it was working before then. Yes, this one doesn't now read it. Oh, I've gone the wrong way, sorry, yeah. That's right, I got upside down. If I hold it the right way, I might be right. Excuse me, this is my first talk here, so you have to forgive me. There's an introduction then. I'll just talk briefly about it. Church and state, you know, it's a huge subject. I don't know what everybody else thought when they were coming here, what on earth I was going to talk about. And in doing a lot of reading to prepare for this, my original idea changed, and after reading so much, I didn't know quite what to do. But in terms of the context of this talk, people can think of religion and state, but I'm going to talk about it in the Western context in terms of my speaker's background, so it'll be the Christianity and state is where I'll be focusing on. As I say there, it's a potentially divisive subject. It will mean many things to many people, and I'm sure I'll probably disappoint, and I'm sure I've left out bits that people would like to put in there. And these views that people will have, naturally will reflect their family upbringing, educational background, the norms of the society we live in. We're all similar. We may disagree on certain elements of theology, but we probably have common views because of the society we live in. And the person's character and our experiences, both in the past and how society is treating us now, might affect how we view the subject. So I'll just go to the next slide. Okay, there's a disclaimer, okay? A couple of years, Diana and I were really lucky enough to spend a few wonderful 3 weeks driving around Ireland. One of the places we visited was Belfast, where this photograph's taken from. It's a city still divided by walls and gates, okay? There's only one area in the centre of the city, which is where both Catholics and Protestants go and meet together, the commercial centre. And that was only 3 years ago. Okay, there are more gates and fences being put up since the peace than before. So one of the activities we'd recommend, though, if it goes there, is to the Green Island, is to take what they call a black taxi ride. Okay, and this is not the official black taxi, but it's a taxi driver that does the same thing. We ordered it through the hotel we were staying in. The rider will take you to the Protestant and the Protestant law areas and the Catholic areas, while telling you about the history of the Troubles, but at the end of the trip, you're not supposed to know which side he was on. Okay, so this is what my talk's about. I'm trying to be impartial, not present my views, and I think this is a good example because it embodies everything about the talk that I'm about to bring. So I hope that I do present a reasonably unbiased presentation, and bearing in mind my background. One thing I will say, the source of information that I've come from is I brought it from published books by academics generally, with references and like where they've come from. It may be populist history, but it's well researched, and Wikipedia, of course, which I couldn't have done it so quickly. And so I didn't visit any websites promoting particular views or another, either for or against, whether church and state should be together. So, go further. Okay, whoops, what happened there? Oh, looks like it goes back for a minute. So the content of the talk is intended to be a historical overview from about the time of Christ. It's presented in chronological order, generally. I do deviate backwards and forwards a little bit. Presents not only well-known subjects, but I've deliberately looked perhaps for less well-known ones, okay? And if we want to leave on time, I've had to leave out bits and pieces, so I apologise beforehand if there's something that I've left out that people think should have been brought in about the history. And in particular, it draws on my experiences and observations in travelling with Diana and how that's altered my views over time in visiting other countries and seeing, I guess, the same thing in a different context, okay, and it's influenced what I've put together today. So we'll start with the Roman Empire. Okay, the picture there is of Julius Caesar contemplating crossing the Rubicon. Now, the Rubicon River is a river of Rome where victorious generals weren't allowed to bring their troops across. The river is actually just a little creek. It's changed directions a few times, but it really might have been a little bit bigger than that in ancient times because there was less agriculture going on. But basically, it was an insignificant river, but it was symbolic. The victorious general wasn't allowed to bring his legion across into Rome. So what he decided to do was cross that river with his troops and basically threaten the Republic. And he did that in 49 BC. Thus, in 29 BC, the Roman Republic ended and the Caesars started. Okay, so and it became a kingship type system, a principate. The emperor inherited a well-organised bureaucracy and sophisticated legal system, which forms the basis of maintaining a peaceful and law-abiding society. So they continued that idea of Pax Romana. And in many respects, a lot of the laws and bureaucracy that we inherited today, we are very much Roman in the way we run our society. And these laws were actually revived by Charlemagne in Europe about 800 years later, with the Holy Roman Empire, and I'll talk a bit about that later. A key outcome of the emperor becoming the emperor, I guess, the king, was he became Pontifex Maximus. In i.e. he was the chief priest. So he stood between the gods and the people. Okay, and that's an important point because that's the objections the Christians had about owing allegiance to the emperor, because he was the representative on earth of God, basically. So circa 30 AD Jesus, I think this is the important point. He said, when he was questioned by the Pharisees, "Show me the coin you're paying for tax. Whose portrait is this, and whose inscription? Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and this is essence, and to Caesar and to God what is God." So this is the essence of what is to follow. Okay, this idea that Jesus enunciated there. So in AD 325, Constantine summoned a church council at Nicaea, the famous Nicene Creed, to resolve issues of Christ's divinity, an issue that was threatening to divide the Roman Christians. Like today, the Christians, in his view, had many views, and they liked arguing about those views together. And he was keen to bring his empire together under the Christian banner. So, following Christ's instructions to his disciples to gain converts, and Christianity spread throughout the Roman Empire despite persecution. At the time when Constantine came on the scene, AD 3012, he walked through the gates of Rome at the head of his army with the sign of the cross, because he'd had a vision of it, marked on his soldiers' shields, and the head of Maxentius on the tip of a spear. So he defeated him at the famous bridge, the Milvio Bridge over the river Tiber, which he crossed. There was debate whether Constantine was a Christian or not, but he was baptised on his deathbed. So I think he genuinely believed in Christianity, but he had a lot to do with bringing Christianity together under one umbrella. So he recognised that the Christian religion, not being based on ethnic boundaries, a Christian could be Jew, Gentile, Greek, Latin, anything, or social status. They could be a freeman or slave, so it crossed all boundaries. And it could be a unifying force within his empire. As the first step to when he became emperor of the whole empire, was to issue the Edict of Milan, AD 313. It's an important edict, and he's often mistaken for his views. It recognised that anyone who wishes to observe the Christian religion may do so. So in other words, they weren't going to be persecuted within the Christian empire without molestation, but he also conceded similar rights to other religions for the sake of peace in our time. So he recognised that having freedom of religion was an important aspect of a peaceful empire. So he becomes the sole ruler of the total empire. When he became emperor, it was divided in two. But in 324, his army defeated the Eastern Empire's army at a place I can't pronounce, Chrysopolis, and the reason that he did go to war with him, he'd been accused of persecuting Christians. Okay, so that was the pretext he made to take on, to become emperor of the whole empire again.
So
the empire was
his opponent.
Yes, yeah, that was his opponent. Licinius was the name, I think. Yeah, Licinius, sorry. My daughter keeps telling me how badly I pronounce things. All right, so now we come to two gentlemen of the Roman Empire, Theodosius and Ambrose. Has anybody heard of Ambrose? Most people, I think, have, and I've read about him in the past, but it was in reading through this, I thought this would be a good next part of the history of church and state in the Christian context. So, in AD 325, Constantine summons a church council at Nicaea to resolve Christ's divinity, and he issued the Nicene Creed. Okay. Following the death, a real period of instability occurred again, okay, and the Roman Empire was split to a number of parts, and the period I'm talking about, it was in three parts. There's Theodosius in the Eastern Empire, there's the African Empire, and then there's the European Empire, which Britain was part of. In AD 360, in AD 386, a decree was issued on behalf of Valentinian in II, Italy and the Northern Africa, that's the emperor there, by his mother, because he was too young to rule at the time, that Ambrose, the Bishop of Milan, should hand over one of the churches to Milan to the Arians. Now, you know about the talk, it's about the divinity of Christ that was supposed to be settled by the Nicene Creed, but obviously there was still that debate going on. And obviously the emperor's mother supported the Arians. So Ambrose refused, and after invasion of the main basilica, the Nicene Christians demonstrated, riots and arrests followed, so there was quite a bit of instability. This all occurred in Holy Week, before the soldiers were ordered out. In AD 389, 3 years later, Theodosius, the Eastern Emperor, signs a peace treaty with his neighbours, the Persians, and they were a significant empire at the time. Okay, you can see it's large there. And maintaining his Eastern Empire, his border was important. That gave him an excuse to march east, and he basically he gained control without bloodshed of the two empires. Okay, the Western Emperor had killed the Venetian Valentinian in a battle, and when he heard that Theodosius was marching towards Rome, he basically surrendered because he was outnumbered, and he was exiled, not killed, which was quite a good thing. So in AD 389, though, Theodosius was a bit different than Constantine. The issues of the first decrees to remove the last vestige, he issued the last decrees to remove the last vestiges between state and the old Roman religion, including feast days, the end of the Olympic Games, and which led to the destruction or reuse of old temples. Okay, so his decree then made Christianity the only religion of the Roman Empire. So, however, he wasn't without fault, and in AD 390, Ambrose again, he was a bit of a troublemaker, I think, the Bishop of Milan, still the Bishop of Milan, but I think he's acting more like the Pope, excommunicated Theodosius, the first excommunication in history, over the deaths of innocent bystanders at a chariot race, some of whom were Christians. I won't go into the background of that story. It's quite a tortured story about how those riots came about and how the reason for the riots. You can read it yourself if you want. Now, Theodosius was excommunicated for 8 months before he decided he'd better go and ask penance. So he actually did go to Milan, and on the steps of the basilica, there's all sorts of talk. I've read various stories about him being in sackcloth and things like that, but I'm not sure. So he presented himself to Ambrose, and after confessing his sins and doing penance, he was allowed to enter the basilica. So this was, I think, the first time that the power of the church was displayed over the emperor, how important the church had become in terms of society. All right, so I better change the slide, see if I can get it to change. Oh, beauty, I've got it to work. All right, so we jump quite a few years now, 500 years later, Okay, the empire's already fallen. It's only actually 303 centuries probably. An important character on the scene was Charlemagne. He created quite a large empire for himself, and you can see it there. And he decided he didn't call it the Holy Roman Empire, but his empire was so large and it surrounded Rome that he decided that he had an empire and it was something like the old Roman Empire, and he would be crowned by the Pope. Okay, and that happened in 800 AD. He revived many of the laws of the Romans and put them down in writing, so they became the laws of Europe, or in their own form. So he was a very important character of establishing rules and laws and how people were to behave in that part of Europe, that influenced by that part there. Okay, so the title of the emperor continued in the Carolingian family until it was contested by the rulers of Italy, so that's the little bit there, in a series of civil wars until the death of the last Italian claimant in 924. So that's 124 years later. So there's a fair bit of instability going on fighting over that empire. The title was revived in 962 when Otto I, a German, was crowned emperor, fashioning himself as the successor to Charlemagne. So he kept on the laws and became the ruler. And that empire, which little of us know, was in continuous existence until it was dissolved in the time of Napoleon in 1806. And it had huge sway and ruled Europe in a relatively peaceful fashion for all of that time. The largest territory was the empire. This was the Kingdom of Germany, where Charlemagne originally came from and had his capital in Aachen. It also came to include Bohemia, the Kingdom of Burgundy, the Kingdom of Italy, and other countries, Romania and places like even further east. The office of the Holy Roman Emperor was elective. So in the end, it was the German princes and numerous other territories who elected the ruler from time to time. Okay, and they ruled over this thing, and they were called dukes, and you've probably heard of that. So each of their little territories were dukes, but they owed allegiance to the Holy Roman Empire, who until the time of the Reformation was crowned. Around the time of the Reformation, the crowning was discontinued around the 16th century. I presume possibly because of the Reformation. All right, so I'll go on to the next slide. Oh, sorry, that's the slide of Charlemagne being crowned. It's interesting, Alcuin, the name Alcuin, he actually was a monk from Northumbria, England, and he became the main advisor to Charlemagne in his laws and like. So he was influenced by quite a range of people. All right, so now we go to the Magna Carta, because that's, I guess, the first expression of human rights or rights of people over their king. So around 1440, so I step back, I've gone on a little bit from the founding of the Holy Roman Empire. A German man, Magna Carta, sorry, I'm reading. Magna Carta, it is originally called the Magna Carta Libertium, the Great Charter of Liberties. So that's what it literally means, the liberties of the barons, okay? Was agreed to by King John of England after a battle at Runnymede, and that's actually the site of the battle, and that's a memorial placed in remembrance of it. So the Magna Carta, though, did promise the protection of church rights. Okay, so it didn't just address human rights or barons' rights, it actually protected the rights of the church as well, and it protected the baron from illegal imprisonment. It guaranteed them access to swift justice. In other words, they weren't going to be thrown in a dungeon or the tower for a couple of years before they were tried. And it limited the amount of money that the barons had to pay to the crown. So there were important parts of that area. The image there is of the Magna Carta, but it's the Magna Carta that's actually in Canberra. Australia does have a copy of the Magna Carta. It's a later edition, but it's only one of about 5 in existence in the world. So if you do want to see one, it's actually there. Okay, and that's from the book that we had on it. So at the end of the war in 1217, it formed part of the peace treaty and agreed to at Lambeth, where the disagreement... what I should say is that after that, neither side honoured the commitments that they'd made in that treaty, so they did break it. It wasn't important, and it led to the Barons' War, a series of wars. And in 1217, it formed a part of the peace treaty agreed at Lambeth, and that's a famous site, I think, isn't it, in terms of the Anglican Church? They talk about the Lambeth things, where the document acquired the pure name of just the Magna Carta, the Great Charter. So in 1297, Edward I confirmed it now as part of English statute law, so it became part of law in 1297. Previously, there had only been an agreement between the King and the Barons. And he did that in exchange for granting of new taxes that he didn't have the rights for in the old one. So it was rewritten. The Magna Carta isn't the same. The first one is not the same as the last one. It was rewritten due to the circumstances of the time. So that's an important thing. I think human rights, the rights of the individual, is an important thing to do with church and state as well. All right. The other important event that occurred is the invention of the printing press. It affected not only the way we look at science, but it did affect the way religion was looked at, very, very importantly so. So circa 1440, we know, a German man, Johannes Gutenberg, he was living in the Roman Empire at the time, and he was living in the town of Mainz. He invented the printing press based on existing technologies, the screw press, but he invented the movable type, which was the key to making it fast. So printing presses were quickly set up throughout Europe, and the first few cities besides Mainz were Rome, Venice and the like, and there were many others. In reading about it, it was only sort of like 20 years and there was 1 million books printed, something like that. It was amazing growth, and the number of dots on the map who had printing presses of the city just spread throughout Europe in an uncontrolled fashion. So what really resulted was the unrestricted circulation of information. And the idea is often revolution, heretical, which transcended borders. So you know about Galileo later on publishing his book in Venice and then circulating it around, because Venice was independent of Rome. So obviously, with that increasing literacy, the power of political and religious authorities were threatened, and we're living in that post that period. All right. The Renaissance, okay, and I bring up a guy called Girolamo Savonarola, and forget me if I pronounce it incorrectly. So who's heard of the guy? Good, okay, that's great. Okay, he was really the first person that enunciated the ideas of the Reformation, okay. He was burned in the square at Florence for his troubles. Well, he was hung together with 2 others before he was burnt. He was supposed to be burnt alive, but the city fathers wouldn't do that, so they hung them first and then burnt the bodies, okay, in front of the Pope, or Pope's representatives, I should say. That happened in 1498. He was burnt. Previous to that, Florence had gone through quite a religious awakening. Okay, he had denounced corruption, clerical corruption, despotic rule and exploitation of the poor. So they were a republic. They were an independent republic. They stubbed their nose at Rome, though Savonarola did want to stay within the Catholic Church and make the reforms, particularly the reforms about paying for penance and things like that. But he was banned, and he disobeyed the ban and continued to preach. One of the things which I may not agree with him, is he was famous for a thing called the Bonfire of the Vanities. And have you heard of the Bonfire of the Vanities? The people that lived in Florence were encouraged to bring their books, their paintings that were non-secular, and burn them, okay, in the square. So he got a few people offside as well. So he was very much a Puritan, in the Puritan mould at the time. So he was well before his time. But he did write a couple of texts, and some of them when he was waiting to die, that were read by Martin Luther, Calvin, and the like. And they did in 20 years. This was 20 years before Martin Luther nailed his edict to the door. To the doors. So he had a huge influence. So I bring him up as the idea of the Reformation that occurred and the break with the Catholic Church. And he was an important part of that in the thinking that was going on. And it was after the printing press was invented, so the ideas were spreading pretty quickly. So as I said, Martin Luther in particular read some of the friars' writings, and in particular the thing that influenced is they contained the ideas of faith and grace, and they anticipated Luther's own doctrine of justification by faith alone. There is an important particular text that he wrote that is famous, but I unfortunately hadn't written it down, and I'm not a real student of history. So around this time then, we'll jump from Europe to England, okay? All right, now I'll explain the meaning of the painting later, but there's King Henry there, a picture of King Henry in his slightly slimmer than probably he died at, okay? But Henry is known for his break with the Rome in England, okay? Which happened in a piecemeal fashion over time. It just didn't happen instantly, so I've read. And this was in around the 1530s, around the time after I think he'd actually killed Anne Boleyn at that time, and until 1536, when the 10 Articles of the Anglican Church were first proclaimed. Now, these were the first doctrinal statements of the Anglican Church. They later have now become, so I learnt the other night in our Bible study, 39 articles. So there are 39 articles now of the Anglican Church. And these were proclaimed after his death. And these later articles, I believe in reading, are more Protestant in flavour. Henry really brought the Anglican Church that Henry created was more Catholic in its teaching and stuff like that. It was only after his death that it became more Protestant in outlook. And as you know, he had a number of people killed who were wanting to go in particular routes. However, one of the key aspects of that came about because of his rule, and it's important, this is a really thing that really shocked me, his radical change ushered in the theory of the divine right of kings in England back again. Okay, so, and you often hear about it in the plays of Shakespeare in the kings fighting their wars in France and the like. So, and I think Shakespeare was deferring to the kings at the time by expressing that idea of divine right. And that divine right was actually put into law. It was called the Act of Supremacy in 1534. It declared that the king was the only supreme head in earth of the Church of England, and that the Church of England was the only church that you could go to in England. So he became the representative of God in England, in effect. And it was treasonous if you disagreed with it. So the Treasons Act in 1534 also made it high treason, punishable by death, to refuse the oath of supremacy, acknowledging the king as such. And all adults in England in the kingdom were required to acknowledge this. Okay, so they must have been called to court and they had to say it, and they were put to death if they didn't, or fled or whatever. Okay, so I don't think Henry's intentions were all good in founding the Church of England personally. So proceeds from the dissolution of the monasteries, which were the important thing that came about, the grab of the land of the church, which had been donated by people over time, were used to repay his debts. He was in debts to Florence and the bankers of Florence and Rome substantially, and in wars in France, and of course his extravagant lifestyle. And in reflection, Martin Luther has the second to last say in my talk, and he was not impressed of Henry. He said, Henry the page wants to be God and do as he pleases. Okay, that was his statement about what he thought of Henry, and his grab to make the king the head of the church and the speaker the person between you and God. So there's a lot of analogies between what the emperors did, really, back in that time. I was really surprised. I think Veronese, and I think I've got the pronunciation correction from my daughter, was a painter, often threatened with excommunication or death by the popes at the time because he painted paintings that were quite inflammatory at the time, and most paintings in those times had hidden meanings. So it's the Feast of Cana, okay? But if you look closely, the person, the bridegroom is actually Christ. Okay, so he's making a statement. And he's there, you can see him in the middle ground. Can you see him there? There are people above him, which are the ordinary people.
You've got a pointer button.
Oh, have you? Oh.
The red one.
That one. Oh, okay. So there's Christ, okay? Down below here are the various paintings of the heads of Europe. There's Queen Mary there. There's even the emir, the Turkish emir is there. But you notice that none of them are looking at you. The only person that's looking at you that you can see, and you can see his eyes from anywhere you look, is Christ. So Berenices is making his statement, the only person you really owe allegiance to is Christ. Okay? This painting is now in the, just as an aside, and I'll make the aside, is now in the Louvre, if you want to see it. When we saw it, it was in the same room as the, what do we call it? The Mona Lisa. Okay? So you got, and this is a huge painting. Napoleon, when he took it from Venice, had to cut it in half. It's so fragile now that it can't be returned to Venice where it really belongs. Okay, it's an amazing painting. You're meant to sit and look up at it. So it's one that affected me, and I think it does express quite clearly all about what Henry had done and what Martin Luther had said. All right, so I'll take my slides. So now we move on a bit to the time of Oliver Cromwell and the Parliament and the Republic and the civil wars in England. So Oliver Cromwell was born in Huntington, Cambridgeshire, very close to where some friends of ours live. So Diana and I have actually been there, and some of these, I'll talk about that later. So Cromwell became an independent Puritan after undergoing a religious conversion in the 1630s. Okay? He was elected a Member of Parliament in 628 and was on and off a Member of Parliament, and he entered the English Civil War on the side of the Roundheads, or parliamentarians, against the Royalists. Okay, so he was quite clearly, not a Royalist at that stage. He was nicknamed Old Ironsides by the parliamentarians because he demonstrated, even though he was untrained, an ability as a commander of the forces and of men. And he was quickly promoted to being one of the key commanders in the new model army against the Royalists. And he was, credited with the defeat, or playing a significant part in the defeat of the Royalist forces ultimately. Cromwell was also one of the signatories of King Charles's death warrant in 1649, and it did in fact become a dictator in England ultimately. He was selected to take command of the English campaign in Ireland in 1649 to 1650 because at that stage, Ireland was Catholic and the Royalist forces had retreated to Ireland to gather strength and possibly invade England at the time. So after landing at Dublin, which was a Protestant city at the time, Cromwell took the fortified town of Drogheda, which is a port city, so it was to try to block off the chances of supporters of the Royalists bringing in supplies from overseas, where his troops killed nearly 3,500 people after the town's capture. And he reported this in a missive back to the Parliament back in England. And it comprised about 2,700 Royalist soldiers, some civilians, and he pointedly said some Roman Catholic priests. Okay, so this was by his own words. And he reported back from another city at Wexford, and in southern counties he was also, this, I guess you'd call genocide occurred. There are varying degrees about how much he was involved and how many the people were, but it was possibly hundreds of thousands of people that were killed by the English armies in Ireland at the time, of which clearly Cromwell was part of that. So the slides there are from our own visits to various places. Sorry, I pressed the wrong button, damn. All right, so that's a priest's hiding hole. So this is where people who were remained loyal to the Catholic Church and They harboured priests, and when people came to hunt them down, they hid in holes. So you've probably heard of those.
Is that you in the hole?
That's me in the hole, yes. It's actually quite roomy under there. They've hidden it quite well. There was a bench to sit, and there was enough rooms that you didn't feel totally claustrophobic. And that's Cromwell, of course, in his uniform. This is very interesting. This is called a hanging cross. So this was where probably the type of way a lot of those people met their deaths. They were hauled up on the arms of the Celtic crosses, symbolic, I think. This cross was recounted. The Tory was recounted it to us. It's actually at Kells, where the Book of Kells comes from, and it was the person that she was showing around the church told us this story. So it was they're clearly quite strong enough that they used to hang two people at once. So it was quite brutal times. It's different times than we live in now, clearly.
Well, around here.
Yeah. Oh, it's around here anyway. All right. Good point. Okay, so now we bring in the idea of freedom of religion, because when you look up the idea of church and state, you realise that freedom of religion, or freedom to practice your own religion, or freedom to impose your own religion on others is all part of church and state. You can't really separate the two. Or it's very difficult. There'd be a good philosophical argument about that.
Constantine did it ages before this.
Yes, he did it. Yes, that's right. So what came about was, this is an interesting slide, okay? This is the edict. The first one that we should be aware of is the painting here. It was painted about 300 years later, but it's called the Edict of Torda, okay? And don't laugh, in 1558, that's around the time of the Reformation time, the Transylvanian Diet, that's the Parliament of Transylvania at the time, as part of the Holy Roman Empire, issued the Edict of Torda, and it declared free practice of both Catholics and Lutherans in their society. So they separated church and state probably a couple hundred years before anybody even thought of the idea of doing so, in the modern Europe anyway. Okay. But in 1568 they went even further, under the chairmanship of the King of Hungary, which was nearby, and Hungary at that time, from our other troubles, was quite a liberal society. They didn't require the Jews to live in ghettos. They encouraged them to be part of the general society and contribute to society, for example. So it was obviously quite a lot going on there that we didn't even realise in terms of ideas that have gone further. Under the chairmanship of the King of Hungary, the Prince of Transylvania, following the teaching of a guy called Ferenc David, and he's an important person. He was the founder of the Unitarian Church, of Transylvania. He extended freedom to all. Thus Transylvania had also Catholic and Protestant monarchs. So they allowed the monarchs to be either as well, all who respected the Edict of Torda. And the lack of state religion obviously was unique for centuries, in Europe and anywhere else, I think. So in the English-speaking word then, around the time of 1630s, when the subject was being debated with all the troubles between the various, the Catholics and the Protestants and the killings that were going on, in the English-speaking world, a famous guy called John Locke issued some writings on the concept of separating church and state. Okay, so he's the person that's credited with that idea. Anyway, or one of the people at the time. Obviously, it was probably being talked about at the time, but he was the one that put it in writing. So his argument was that that governments lack the moral authority in the realm of individual conscience, which argued must remain protected from government authority. So, in other words, it was the freedom of the individual he spoke about. The other part was he talked about religious tolerance and individual conscience, along with social contract of the state, became particularly influenced, and it became particularly influenced in the American colonies and the drafting of the US Constitution. So, and the drafting, despite what we may think about the Americans and whatever else, their constitution is actually a brilliant document, and I've got a copy of it with me, so but it's quite long. It's extracts, but it's quite long. So we'll talk briefly about the North American Constitution and its idea of freedom of religion, which means the separation of church from state. It's actually formally in the Constitution. So if Trump or any other party wanted to, for example, ban Islam, they couldn't. That is against their constitution. The judges would rule against them to be able to try to do that. So separation of church and state, and that's a phrase that was is attributed to Thomas Jefferson. Okay, so that's the picture of Thomas there, and he did that in a letter he addressed to a Danbury Baptist Association in Connecticut and others, expressing the understanding and intent to provide a wall of separation between church and state. So he was the driver of the separation of church and state in the United States. So part of the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States, and the Constitution is quite complicated, and I forget it's got articles, amendments, and those amendments existed at the time it first came about, many of them. So that they were amendments to the articles. Okay, so part of the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States, which reads, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of a religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Okay, so that's in the Constitution, and it's against the Constitution if the state interferes. The intent of this clause was to limit the power of the federal government in regard to religion, thus ensuring freedom of religion in the United States of America. It's important to realise at the time also, at the time of the defeat of the British, the American states were, some of the American states had particular religions or particular reformist things that that was the official religion of that state, and you had to be part of that if you wanted to live in that state. So there was a big deal to change this and to change it across the whole federation. The further Article 6 of the Constitution also specifies that no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States. So that's an important point. You can't discriminate against a person because of his religion. So they made that statement a long time ago, and many places follow. I did research which states have freedom of religion in their constitution. It became a nightmare. It's no straightforward thing. Some people don't even have a constitution. England, for example, doesn't have a constitution. It relies on, the precedence of things going on and the House of Lords protecting that precedence. Israel doesn't have a constitution, so it doesn't, for example, and there are other states that don't as well. And there are other states that, of course, have a religion as a state religion. So it brings us, I think, logically to one of our last slides, which is Ireland towards reconciliation. So it brings us back to Ireland, and there are a couple of images there that are quite poignant, and I will talk to them briefly. So between when Henry pronounced his declaration that the only church in England was the Church of England, the persecution of the Catholics did continue right up until 1829, basically, when the Roman Catholic Relief Act, it was called, or Emancipation of the Catholics, occurred. And it occurred from Ireland, from the Irish Parliament. At that stage, Ireland had its own parliament, and the representatives of the Irish Parliament were also, some of them were also part of the English Parliament as well. So, and they were, despite the wishes of the British Parliament, there were Catholics and Protestants there together, all wanting independence of Ireland, okay, at that time. So they were quite united. They wanted to be independent, but they fought for and got the repeal of all the remaining discriminatory and penal laws against Catholics, and it was called the Roman Catholic Relief Act. It was a culmination of a process of Catholic emancipation throughout Britain and Ireland, and it was followed a vigorous campaign by the Irish lawyer Daniel O'Connor. He's affectionately known in Ireland as the Liberator, with the support from the Prime Minister of England, the Duke of Wellington, that's the Duke of Wellington, the guy that defeated Napoleon, I think, as well as the Whigs and the Liberal Tories. So it was universally agreed at the time, I guess influenced by the American Constitution I'm reading, in terms of the timing and the mood of the times, that it was immoral to not allow Catholics to be part of government, for example, okay, or be part of the bureaucracy. They were forbidden to do so. And I should say that in England, So in Ireland, 95% of the land of the Catholic was confiscated and given to Scottish and English settlers as well. So they were actually physically kicked off their lands and became serfs. So going on. Okay, so I'll jump now another 150 odd years.
What's the meaning of that picture?
Okay, I'll come to it. You're just about to hit it. Okay, so in May 2011, when we were a year before we were in Ireland and doing a 3-week tour around the country, the Queen of England laid a wreath bowing her head at the Garden of Remembrance in Dublin. That was dedicated to those who fought against British rules. So that was an amazing act by the Queen, I think. On the next day, wearing green, she visited Croke Stadium, where British soldiers shot and killed 14 people in 1920, apparently in reprisal for the killing of 14 British personnel by the people who were fighting for the split from Britain. So that was an amazing act that she did that, and it was extremely well received in Ireland. A year later, on Her Majesty and the former IRA commander, Martin McGuinness, the second minister of the Northern Ireland Parliament, shook hands in private and met in private, and for the first time shook hands in public. So there were two enemies, and possibly the guy that might have even ordered the deaths of some of her relatives as well. So she made the first move and shamed him into doing that. So that idea is, there's two things there. There's two ideas of that, and those images come, they're too close. Those images come from Derry or Londonderry. It depends on which side you're on, whether you call it Derry, the original name, or Londonderry, it was originally named. And those images come from that, and expresses, I think, the divide between not only Ireland, the Catholics and the Irish, and the loyalists, and those that want to be part of one Ireland. That's not yet there. They're touching hands. There's a bridge that this stands above, and it's quite an amazing sight, but it's quite symbolic. We're putting out our hands to hopefully hug one another in the future, okay? But it's a work in progress, definitely, in Ireland, that's for sure, but it's quite symbolic, and I think that what the Queen did symbolises that. And the other one which really got me was in the Bogside side, was I think it's the idea of giving up arms, and they said, let the revenge be so in other words, forget revenge, be the laughter of our children, in other words, peace.
Happiness.
Yeah, we stay together. All right, so there ends my talk. And I guess, what does this mean for our society? You know, and that's what I'm throwing it open to the thing. To me, the objective of this talk was to give the basis of perhaps further talks about church and religion, using this as a basis, an idea that maybe things haven't changed. There are many ideas that we'll talk about that are in that talk. You know, there's tolerance, reconciliation, living together with different religions, how we do that, and how we influence the state, and how Christians operate in the state that we currently live, or whether we want to go back to where the church is the state religion. But which church? That's my question. All right, so there is a handout of the bullet points you missed. So I tried to use the images rather than point to bullet points, because I know how boring that can be. So it was a bit tricky getting the images. I'll just close. Sorry, I should have put that slide on for the closing remarks. That is obviously the judge, the courts. You judge me whether I was reasonably neutral on what I've talked about or not. Okay, that's what that's about. And the last slide is a list of the references that I drew my main sources from this book. This book here I can really recommend, Susan Wise Bauer, History of the Medieval from Constantine to the First Crusade. She presents the history of the world, and she presents Buddhism, what was going on in India, for example, and places like that at the same time, and how they all intertwined. And it's a brilliant book. It took her years, and she nearly had a divorce, and she thanked her husband for staying with her while she was doing it. She did an earlier book on the ancient history, and she's tackling one up into the current days at the moment. There's the Australian Magna Carta, that's where I got the image from. The year that changed Henry VIII, 1536, by this lady here, and she debates whether Henry was good or bad. She thinks there was a character change somewhere along the line, because he'd been married to Anne Boleyn, not Anne Boleyn, the Spanish lady for 26, Catherine of Aragon, that's right, for 26 years before, with only one daughter, so before he divorced her. Florence, a bit about Savonarola. The Wikipedia of all sorts, I acknowledge those things, and all the useful articles there. Every time I typed one, I got a different view of things. It was really brilliant. Tom Holland, another book I can recommend, In the Shadow of the Sword. It's about Constantine, the birth of Islam, and how that all fits together, and the demise of the Persian Empire. About the same. Oh. All right, so we've gone back. So they're there for people to look if they're interested. And thank you very much. So we'll adjourn for supper.
Thanks very much, Rob. Now you said that you were trying to be unbiased. Mm-hmm. About what?
About whether the church should be separated from the state.
So what do you think are the big issues that we have to choose between?
I think at the moment in our current society it would be the issue of homosexuality, marriage and things like that.
Yeah, well that's particular issues, like the general principle about the relationship between state and church. So
I'd be interested to hear what other people think because people talk about Christian values disappearing and whether they think that maybe making the church align with this, the state align with the church would bring back those values or not, or whether there's a feeling that we have to do it by working within the community we're in or not. They're the issues for me, because I mean other people have tried to impose religion over the time and probably failed in the end, or brought about wars or unhappiness or death and destruction. So, and I know the Christians some persuasions think it's the end times with respect to something like that, the homosexuality marriage laws. So,
bigger things going on than that.
I think the point is that with the laws that as they're coming in, they are now restricting everything again. That you have to go to the official state line, and you can't deviate from that. So we're kind of coming back to that.
Well, it's
different.
I think it's not a bit like that. It's a bit like conscience. Are you going to live in a society where that's allowed, but nobody's stopping you from doing the reverse? Okay, and so that to me is the question. I don't have an answer necessarily. Okay, it's for sure.
In America, what I can see, it's a bit like they've got their tax-free status. So it's a bit like they're kind of blurring the edge. What I can see, it's a bit like, well, if you go against the company line and you start saying you can lose your tax status. So there's different ways of controlling or manipulating churches. I'm just giving America for example, because you can lose your tax status.
Why? Because that could be challenged in court, as far as I can see, and the state would lose. No, the state would lose. The Constitution is quite clear that they can't do that, and they would lose it. It's like carrying a gun. It's clear you can't do it. You can't discriminate.
So are you talking about America or Australia?
America. Australia is quite.
They can't take your tax status away.
Oh, you mean Australia or America?
No,
you started America.
Yeah, America.
Yeah, America. It is quite clear that is unconstitutional.
Tax-free status is a big different.
It is actually in the. I think that tax-free status is actually somewhere in one of the amendments. Actually, that they don't have to have tax.
Well, they call it 501c3, so I don't think it's part of any amendment, because the amendments are quite brief, and that sounds like it's part of a very big bill somewhere.
Yeah, but the Constitution. This is a printout of only extracts from it. It's massive. It's quite a complicated document because there's articles, as I said, and there's the amendments. Yeah. I bet you nobody in the state of America has read it, And as I said, I started to read it to find the bit that had been quoted. I couldn't find it because it wasn't here. They hadn't actually printed that bit in Wikipedia.
But taking away an organisation's 501c3 status is not the same as forbidding them to
correct.
follow their beliefs.
But it's a means of control.
It is a means of control.
What I'm saying. Yeah. So there's different means to get to the same situation. If you're preaching against state and we should stand up against just different examples. It's a bit like if you're anti-government or anti-whatever, which they don't like, they can change, you know, your tax status to get the same.
Well, they can only
particular-
do that with the Act of Parliament.
The
presumably.
particular things in America there
different.
that are, I suppose, putting tax-free status into doubt is when Christians, spokespeople I suppose are being too political. So I mean that's Christians will disagree on what's appropriate to come from the book,
Yeah.
and a lot of people like myself would probably say talking about political issues is quite okay, but endorsing particular parties or candidates crosses the line of what's appropriate as Christian teaching.
Well, that's right. It's inappropriate if it's done from the pulpit, whether it's in a mosque or in a Christian church.
And so when what's
And that's
supposed to be a
definitely against the
church
Constitution.
and therefore is getting a free kick with the tax goes beyond Christian teaching and endorsing particular political parties or candidates, then it's fair to question, well, should you be treated like a church, or should we be treated like something which is more than just a church?
Yeah, and I mean,
Political party for some.
And the way some churches and some church leaders in America have been working, then you see the reasons for it.
yes, I mean, though I think reading the Constitution, I don't think you can stop anybody from creating your own sect and call yourself that, and it's recognised. You know, if you've got enough
And then you've got
followers.
tax-free status.
Yeah, I
Roll
presume.
your own set.
I presume so. Yeah.
Right, okay.
Because the words are quite clear, or any other. You don't have to be the formal religion, you know.
Groups and stuff.
But I don't know whether that leads to tax-free status, if that's your problem.
No, it doesn't automatically,
No.
because I've read,
No.
but I used to read a lot about
And why, I don't think it should either.
And apparently they had to blackmail quite a few civil servants in America, or threaten them with death, various things, exposure of their private secrets, in order to get them to grant the Scientology, so-called Church of Scientology tax-free status like the normal church. And I think that's been challenged now. But, it wasn't automatic, put it that way. There was a lot of
that's
conniving
right.
going on.
Yeah. So I agree that that's a grey area. That why should you have tax-free status if you're a non-recognised sect? I guess that's
Well,
that's not
why
denying
should-
you.
yeah, well,
that's not denying
Within
you.
Australia, does the church get particular
Some, but not the same as America.
concessions?
You have to be a recognised church.
Yeah, I mean, if you, like if I work and I'm paid, then I'm going to pay tax on that. But if someone gives me money, then that's a gift. And so tax is different for gifts, isn't it?
Yeah, but you're not
Same
taxed on
applies
that.
to in a church. It depends how the full-time person there is supported.
Some
Yeah,
would say
it's-
also because
yeah.
the money comes from donations,
It's already,
Yes.
people already pay
people
tax.
already pay tax on it.
That's right. So it's a whole lot of gifts from individuals. Really, if they're not coerced into doing it, if it's a freely given gift, then why should tax be paid?
Well, I guess.
Yeah, but that's not a
No,
religious issue
issue,
at all,
no.
isn't it?
But also,
That's
yeah.
right.
but also, if you're a company, you receive money, you pay company tax, but you also pay tax on your employee as well. So the precedent in ordinary society is already there.
Yeah.
Okay, the money comes
However,
in.
I
Yeah.
know people who work for charities, non-religious.
Oh, look, I
charities.
wouldn't. I'm
And
not.
that,
yeah.
just because you may know what I'm saying, but everyone else might not.
Yeah.
Like my sister works for a charity. It's not a religious charity,
Mm.
but she doesn't. The company doesn't pay tax on paying her income because she's doing charity type stuff. They couldn't afford to employ all those people to do the stuff
right.
that they do, which is good. Otherwise, so some might say the same about people who work in a church. It's not
correctly,
a charity as such.
That's right. So I mean, if they're doing charitable works, which they do, a lot of denominations, there's no issue. I don't think. So in Australia, it wouldn't be an issue. But Australia doesn't have the freedom of religion. I did research Australia, and it's very messy ground.
Yeah.
The Constitution doesn't equivocally grant the same. It doesn't have the same words like the American Constitution. So it is up to the courts to make up their decision. I don't think anybody's really challenged it or talked about it. I don't remember, but I remember reading about a couple of clauses that could cause issues.
Does the church get special treatment in Australia compared with other religions?
If the church is doing stuff for, that maybe the state should have done, helping the poor and stuff like that, then they should get special status.
Right, but not on the grounds of their religion, but on grounds of other criteria.
Yes, I believe, yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting that this whole idea of separation of church and state is very rare throughout history. You
Yes,
kind of
it is.
alluded to it with the Romans, but go right back through history.
Yeah,
and the whole
Constantine
idea
briefly for about 50 years achieved it, and then the Transylvanians were apparently the first to really put it into practice ever.
the important thing was political solidity,
amazing.
certainty. And if you've got different religions in
Well,
your country, then you've got division in your country. So make everyone the same religion, and we can keep the country going together. And that was the standard way of doing stuff.
But that is so against what Jesus taught.
It is, that's why I brought it up. He said, there's the state, give it to the state what they owe, and practice your religion
But it
separately.
predates Jesus as well. If you look, if you rethink the Old Testament, you can see the principles there, the separation of powers. There were the priests, the
judges,
and the kings. At times there were kings, and if you overstepped the mark, you got into trouble. And one time when Saul, they were still getting the hang of this king thing, and Samuel was supposed to turn up and do the religious part of the day, and the sacrifices, and he was running late, so Saul sacrificed, King Saul sacrificed the animals, and Prophet Samuel said, "For this you lose the kingship," and he deposed him basically. I mean, it took a while to actually take an effect, but he said God's going to punish him for this, because he'd overstepped the mark, you see, and because there was separation of powers.
No,
so
but
that's in a sense.
there's a separation of powers, but the
Same thing.
but
Same
the
thing.
church, but there is only one religion.
Yeah, that was a theocracy.
That's the whole point.
Don't you see the similarity between separation of
No,
powers?
I disagree that there's no separation of church and state in the instance you've drawn.
That kind of incident that you're referring to, and there are several in the Old Testament.
Yes,
There's
it wasn't the only one, absolutely.
There are other things that trespassed into what the priest was supposed to be doing and got into trouble for it.
But that's the same as Ambrose.
That's like that
Yeah.
kind of thing. That's equivalent to the Ambrose and the Emperor,
Yes.
and later on the Charlemagne and the Pope of the time. The division between those characters and who has what power and who has.
But it was in a run religious
They
state.
were all.
Yeah, but all right, then maybe I see too much overlap, and you don't. But I think that's the cause of, for example, why when John Kennedy was elected president of America, there was a lot of nervousness that he would just do what the Pope of Rome would tell him to do, which meant that the Pope of Rome would then rule America, and because there wasn't the separation of powers, you see, in the Catholic, apparently in that era and perhaps earlier, it was not unusual for Catholic sermons to contain very political statements, and you should do this and vote for this candidate. And
I'm
whatever.
sure there was many in the Protestant churches too.
Very
But you may not have noticed it. Yeah.
Sure, I just haven't read about them. I remember
Or
reading
even
about
experienced
controversy about Kennedy. You know, that everyone was saying, "Oh no, what are they going to do? Get a Catholic, king, or president?" And so I think it's related issues.
Yes, but I've also,
feeds into
funny you
this.
should mention that, because I can't quote it exactly, but he made a quite clear statement that he quoted these articles of the Constitution. He said, I as President will bring into my executive group whoever I choose, whether they're Catholic, Protestant or the like, and I will not be dictated to by the Pope or the Church of England or the Episcopal. So he made that statement quite clear. So you can't accuse him of being beholden to the Pope, because he made it quite clear he was his own boss
It was an issue at
in
the
that
time,
regard.
wasn't it?
No. So he probably made that statement in regard to what you're just saying.
Church in Australia is free from the influence from the government or control. Do you think we live in a situation where we're free now?
In Australia, yes.
There's not 100% separation for anything.
That can never be. No.
When the
There's
church
always
takes
shades
money-
of grey. There's no
When the
black and
church
white.
takes money from the government, it's beholden to the government to the extent that it takes that money.
Yeah.
Look at chaplaincy. The chaplaincy program before and after the government started funding it. Very different program. But maybe that's fair enough. You're going to take the money. You know you've got to do what the person giving you the money tells you to
It's
do.
a golden rule. He has a golden mate's rule.
Well, no, but it's like
But
you know.
in some European countries, I think it's still the case today in Germany.
Yes, correct.
And the Scandinavian countries, church people, church officials, and full-time people employed in the church are actually paid by the government.
Yeah, that's true.
Really?
In
No,
Scandinavian,
it used to be in Germany. It was only the.
in Scandinavian countries.
Yeah,
I didn't know the
Lutheran-
same
I think
name.
it's the Lutheran Church, like
Yeah.
in
Alright.
Finland and Sweden.
Yeah, and the
The
churches are
Lutheran
supported
Church
with
is the
taxes.
estate
I
church.
Yeah.
didn't know
taxes.
that there are any Christians in those countries.
Well, they are.
Oh, come on.
That kind of relates.
They have
But-
the church tax in some of those countries. So,
Yeah.
so as part of the taxation system, the tax, some of your tax gets paid into the church, and you can choose which denomination, or you can nominate another charity.
No, in Germany, because I read this as part of this, it's actually only particular religions. It used to be only the Catholics and the Lutherans would receive the payment, 50-50. Now there's a few others denominations are part of that. There's about 8 or 5 or 6 or something like that. So it's not everybody gets it. It's just those particular ones. And I think it's
principle as in like our country. We don't. It's generally, and people give money to the poor so much because we pay our taxes and the government gives money to the poor.
and it's purely paid on the
But
percentage
same
of people
principle, I suppose.
who claim your religion, their religion. So
You
I
mentioned,
presume when you get so small, you don't get anything.
You mentioned maybe conflict with the church. Penny Wong's statement and others are just recently saying the church should stay out of decisions on same-sex marriage because that's a matter for the state to determine. Nothing to do with Christian views or people.
Sorry, from the fact that Christians are members of the state.
Yes. So did she? I didn't hear the statement. I was overseas. I think
But
probably
if
at the
that's
time.
the case, then she would be representing a humanistic, atheist type view. Doesn't she therefore
An assumption of where-
Because I was going to mention that maybe atheism is a religion also, but which she's entitled to do, I guess.
Sorry?
It's just an attempt to shut up Christians.
Yeah, but she's entitled to say that also.
Yeah, but she wasn't critical of any businesses like Qantas supporting same-sex marriage. It was only critical of the church because it was a different view to hers.
Yes.
And she's not criticising those businesses that are forcing their employees to wear that ring that shows that they support same-sex marriage. It's a
What
ring-
business is that?
What
Well,
business
there's
is
a couple
that?
of them. It's a ring that isn't complete, doesn't go all the way around your finger. And everyone can see.
Is that an urban myth, or is that? Have you actually seen it?
Oh, it's
Before
real.
I accept that, I would like to see it. That sounds an urban myth. No, I'm not looking. As I said, I deliberately made the statement. I did not look up atheist or religious sites that promoted anything because I did not trust anything that was said there.
He only had so much time to speak.
And that's right. So I did, and I only sifted through. But basically, some people were religious.
suggested
Yeah.
that companies should also butt out of the debate.
Oh,
Exactly,
yeah,
yes.
totally.
That is an infringement of rights.
They've got even less to say about it.
But see, in Australia, we can't go this companies because we don't have it. The freedoms quite clearly enunciated as the American Constitution. They would not get away with that in America. Okay, even though they may actively promote it, but they couldn't stop their employees from doing what they want. Or not do what they want, but have their own beliefs.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they cut your finger off if you refuse to wear the thing, but you mark it so you can be ostracised, you see.
But hang on. First of all, quote the companies first before we go any further.
Qantas.
And it's not. I know
No. Sorry, the ring, and that's because the boss is
a.
a.
The ring?
I've never heard of it.
I've never heard of the ring.
I've heard of it, but
It's been in the news.
it's whether the extent to which employees are forced to wear it is debatable.
Yeah, so like they're offering the ring to passengers. So what's the name of the ring?
I don't know what they're calling it. I just know. I've seen
there was a
picture
name
of-
for the ring.
I've seen an image
Oh,
of it.
okay.
It doesn't go
One
all the
ring.
way around. It's like a
Oh.
clasp that doesn't close around the ditch or whatever you want to wear on it. And like I said, it's like I just.
They're
feel it's
encouraging people to take the ring and wear it on the
Yeah.
flights. But
and
I don't know whether the employees are forced to wear the ring.
It's the effect on the employees that worries me because I've been a victim of workplace bullying in various workplaces, and
Yeah.
I just see it as a means of targeting people for
I think they've overstepped the mark, but also the guy that put the pie in the guy's face also slightly overstepped the mark also.
Yeah.
Okay. Because that was definitely insulting.
Sorry, who was his face?
The CEO's...
Alan Joyce was speaking at the press club and opponent of same-sex marriage and member of the National Party, I think, came and put a pie in his face.
Oh, how gross.
Lemon meringue it was.
Lemon meringues are quite nice.
Yeah.
But was that over the
But I think that...
the gay marriage
Yes.
issue?
Hang on, I think we've digressed a little bit, but it does show how emotive the issues can be and how we do need to separate. How we live in quite a civil society now, and we shouldn't take it for granted. And whether you're on that side or the other side, you should criticise people that overstep the mark.
With the Ambrose Theodosius
Yes.
incident, do you think that's okay?
Which one?
Where Ambrose
No, personally...
excommunicated him, and then he repented and was accepted back in.
I think there's a couple of things. I think Ambrose was clearly quite dictatorial and didn't like the dissent. But then again, he was only sticking to what the Nicene Creed had said in disallowing that. In terms of excommunication, I think he was probably overstepping his mark, but he was actually trying to make a statement that I think that the Church, and he was not the Pope, has authority over the Emperor, because the actual the thing was, he said his army had killed a lot of innocent people, so that was the thing was wrong. And he wouldn't actually say that he wouldn't bring the people who had caused that thing to justice. That was the real issue. Okay, so and he wouldn't do that. So that's the reason he excommunicated him. I didn't elaborate on it too much, but that's the real reason. And it all came about because there was a certain incident in a pub where there was somebody had exposed themselves, and the particular charity that was supposed to win the race, the favourite that would win it, he was banned by the particular army general because I guess his guy was then going to win. Because that guy wasn't in there, everybody rioted, including Christians who were at the thing. There were innocent bystanders also were killed who weren't involved in the rioting, and the emperor didn't want to do anything about it. So Ambrose then said to him, "You really, in all conscience, should do something about it."
Yeah, I reckon what Ambrose did was fair enough.
Yeah, in that context, he did.
He was excommunicating a fellow Christian.
Yes, exactly right.
Yeah, so he wasn't trying to control politics.
No, clearly Theodosius was a Christian.
Control a Christian.
Yeah. So Theodosius spent quite a long time over it. I've also read that, I think it was around Christmas, so that he actually had to go through snow to do it, and he walked quite a part of the way. So it was apparently a true repentance, rather than just an act, of rolling up and asking for forgiveness. Yeah. So it was interesting times, and but what it did, I think, was set the precedent that the Church did have some authority over the state,
And
which now it's lost. Okay.
And now imagine that President Kennedy had ordered the army go and do something which a Catholic bishop decides was a breach of human rights, and therefore Kennedy's a bad Christian, and he has to repent.
Yes, he might be criticised.
I think it's fair enough.
But I
you
think
can excommunicate him as a Christian, but you're not removing him as president.
No, or any.
That's right. That's what he was doing. He wasn't having a go.
Or any Christian political leader who has their church leaders suggesting what is or isn't an appropriate thing to do.
That's right. I think that, and that's the right of the church to do that.
Sounds
in
like
any society.
Church discipline. Sounds like a matter of church discipline.
It was.
But he would have had to have a great deal of courage to
he clearly had
stick
it.
by a principle in relation
He defied two emperors, so
So this is where church
and his mum.
It's a bit like if you can have disagreements to such an extent, one goes left and the other one goes right. And it's been happening all through history. It's a bit like...
But that's what struck me, is there's so many analogies. There's the reconciliation part, there's the bringing, there's the where the state, where suddenly the ruler is the state and the religion, and he imposes that on you and actually persecutes people. that's not the society we would want to live in, clearly.
That's not right.
It's not right.
All right, you spoke about Charlemagne.
Yes,
And it was Pope Leo I who crowned him.
yes.
But there were other things about Charlemagne, because he conquered Germanic tribes.
Correct.
And
he was a Frankish
converted them by force.
Yes, true.
And so this is kind of the first instance, I think, in where tribes were converted to Christianity by force.
Okay.
And Pope Leo actually
Good
expressed reservations about that. And Charlemagne's response was, "You do your job and I'll do mine."
Yes, I remember that statement. So, as I said, there are many things I've missed out that you would probably have a go at me, but that's another slide.
I'm not having a go at you.
No, but I meant there were so many paths you could take that I thought, well, which ones are the dead ones? But that's a good point, actually. It probably should be in there.
Yeah.
Is that right? Was that the first occasion when there was forced conversion?
As far as I
We
know.
know.
Yeah.
No, I think...
That's where it started.
Yeah, I think...
In anger.
Yeah, I think even though Theodosius made Christianity the religion and pulled down the churches and just stopped the Olympic Games and temples and things... Sorry, temples, I should say. And that he didn't persecute the pagan or the...
Although if you'd had your place of worship pulled down, you might feel persecuted.
Yes, you would definitely feel persecuted, but he didn't. So persecution means killing, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. He prosecuted rather than persecuted by
Yeah,
me.
it's a lot more persecution than killing.
Yes, that's literally what it means.
Persecuted for being a Christian.
Yeah, you haven't...
been killed.
No, you haven't been persecuted for being a
Don't tell
Christian.
me I wasn't being persecuted.
No, you were being prosecuted or being attacked.
Bullied, whatever,
Yeah, that's right.
threatened.
Well, that's the original meaning, isn't it, I think? Is that the original meaning of persecute? To kill?
No, I don't know.
Or has it got a more
I
modern
think it means
context?
kicked on.
Yeah, been picked on.
Yeah, in the modern context, but in the original
Killing
context...
is just one
Well,
aspect of
it could just mean
persecution.
they sack you, you lose your job.
Yeah, nowadays it
Or
means
lose your
that.
business down. I mean, there's lots of things that short of killing.
I think it's kind of there in the Beatitudes, like blessed are you when people say, persecute and say all false things about you. So,
Yeah.
so it can be attacking you at a personal level, not just killing you. Yeah.
One of the big problems with having total separation and having everyone able to choose what they want to believe, what sect or whatever they go with, is that then requires all the different people to be able to have civil conversations.
That's right. And that's an important thing that Locke said, that there should be freedom to choose your religion or change your religion. Okay? I think that might even be in the Constitution of the United States, that you're allowed to change your religion and not be persecuted for it.
Is it?
Yes.
This is
So that's an important point, because it's raised in something I read. Or change religion is mentioned in some text I was reading. Now, whether it's said categorically or whether it's been interpreted by the courts, I don't know. Which is, I mean, in Islamic society, it's not encouraged that people change religion.
That's another state.
But they do have freedom to practice their own religion generally.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
see, when practicing your religion means obeying the Sharia, and the Sharia says, if your child offends you, you're allowed to kill your child or your grandchild, no question asked, and you're allowed to beat your wife, and you're allowed to do this. But, so the laws of the nation, the laws of the territory you're living in might say you can't beat women, you can't kill your kids and grandchildren, and you can't. But it's my religion, I've got a right to do it. So you've got these competing
Sharia
rights.
is interpreted very widely.
Yeah, that's right.
And how they get around it most of the time living among us is that if they can't get away with it, they won't practice it. But
it's a bit
we've got
unfair.
competing rights, competing demands, and so you can. So what I think what's going to happen, what has been happening is, yes, you can say you're a Muslim as long as you don't practice all Sharia, but
You don't have to
you're not
practice
really
Sharia because it's actually an aside. But that's beside what I think that I hope that those slides showed is that we as Christians are not alone in doing the same thing to people who disagree with us. Okay, and there were many. I mean, there were hundreds of thousands of people that were burnt at the stake during that period, I believe.
Hundreds of thousands?
Yes, hundreds of thousands. Quite a
Sorry,
few.
what are you
Or
talking
killed because
during the religious wars?
during the religious wars and the Reformation times, there were hundreds of thousands of people killed because of the religion they had, whether they were Catholic or Protestant. And that's not right either.
sure.
So that's imposing.
Helen, when did the rule of thumb go out in England?
Don't know.
Yeah, not that long ago.
No.
So we have to be careful when we have these arguments.
I know, because hung, drawn
What
and
was that?
quarter was actually, to be hung, drawn and quarter was an awful way to die too.
But let's talk about now. You know, we can't drag that 200-300 years ago.
We can.
Well, you can.
You can, but is
Because,
it useful?
No, yes, it is, because it shows we're only a few hundred years away from that.
Yes, but thank God we left it behind us.
But we didn't leave it behind.
It was thousands of years before we did.
You know, that's
So,
where we have to join, you know, people of other beliefs, including atheists, in defending secularism.
Yeah.
That's what's demanded.
And get the other religions to accept it.
I think one of Rob's chief points right at the beginning of what he said was Jesus set things up in a certain way.
Yes, right.
And if we do things that are wrong, then we're going contrary to the fundamentals of the Christian faith. Certain other belief systems, whatever they do, may be in accordance with the fundamentals of their faith. And so we need to concentrate on the fundamentals of what Jesus set before us, and where we, as in the church in general, has done wrong, are going against that. We need to say, yes, that was wrong, but that was not how the church was supposed to do stuff. It is definitely genuinely wrong. Whereas some of these other people might say, well, this is how we were told to do things.
Yeah.
And then we can differ on that sort of basis.
Yeah, well, you can have discussions, but I'm trying to think, what can a person do? Say you're a school teacher and this little girl comes to you and she's 13 and she says, my parents are saying it's time for me to get married. And I'm a bit worried because I'd really like to finish my high school and maybe even be a teacher.
If you're a manager reporter, you contact the government.
You're allowed to do that.
So that way you are not letting them practice part of their religion.
No, that's not a religion. That's culture. You're mixing up religion and culture, because it wasn't long ago before many of the cultures, including the Jewish ones, would have allowed that to occur.
Yeah, Mary was about
So,
I know.
yeah, so
And
therefore
then
it's a
quite
cultural
scary
thing.
when you look up
In India?
I don't use Wikipedia, but if you look up age of consent in Wikipedia, it's shocking how low it is in some countries
Yeah,
now.
but
I
even
get
in
that.
England, there were brides at, what were they married at, 13, 14? So, yeah.
But anyway,
So-
so the point is we're
Yeah.
defending the laws and the values of our country.
Yeah, which says that you
Not
can't do
having
it.
an argument about which religion has.
Yeah.
And
That's
that's
right.
what I am honestly trying to do that, because I'm saying, what do we do in the laws now of
Well,
our country now in
Well, you report
2017?
them.
You report it, and that
Hmm.
means I'm blocking that person from really living out
That's
their
fine.
religion.
No. I'm saying it's not religion. That's what I'm really trying to say.
The
Yeah.
principle applies.
Hmm.
What happens in a situation where
The laws of the land.
where the religious a religious value may be in conflict with basically the freedom of religion. Sorry.
Well, freedom of the individual to do as they please. So in living in a society, you must accept the norms of that society and the rules of
I can
that
agree with you on
society.
that. Let's, the law of Australia trump Islamic law for sure, absolutely.
Hang on. You shouldn't say you're saying Islamic law, which I agree, but
Yes.
but you've put it your things out of context. It's a cultural thing you're talking about as the example.
Yeah, but the principle still applies.
Like, it could be
you
an
say,
Indian-
should the law of the land be able to trump Christian?
Yeah, and I agree with you. I say, but you should be doing that on the basis of it's illegal. It's not, and not even mentioning religion, because it may not be religion. It's a cultural thing. It could be an Indian couple that's doing it, or it could be somebody from
It could be a
Africa.
Hindu or Sikh couple that are
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Or not Sikhs necessarily, but
Mormon.
Mormon. See, or you could be the second wife, and that's illegal. So, so it's the law of the land which is accepted at one person. And you're living in that ring. Change it if you want to, but do it by democratic means.
And just because something is allowed in one religion or in some other culture doesn't mean they're required to do that. And so the example of child marriage is, yeah. But I mean, there's still other ones like, but imagine, so some of the, if you think declaring allegiance to the king as kind of head of the church
Yes.
is against Christianity as you understand it, then where do you stand? Because then what you wanted to do, following Christianity as you understand it goes right against the law of the land. Then and then you've got other people saying, oh, these non-conformists, their religion is causing them to go against the laws of the land. We've got to report this.
Yeah. So therefore, there is a moral case for fighting against unfair laws, and so history shows that the French Revolution or whatever, that when things are unjust, there is a case for civil disobedience. And civil disobedience, as we've seen, does work too. Sometimes peaceful, sometimes not.
It's a little bit like Danny. He took a stand, he took a stand against the government and, for the atrocities, a peaceful stand, and basically turned India around.
That's right. So the point is there is a case to fight. Well, sorry, it depends on whether you're a pacifist and what Jesus would have said. I don't think Jesus is clear on that. I'm not clear on it, but he did overturn the tables in the temple, which is sort of like a fairly violent act. So I don't think he says that we all should be pacifists and stand by while these things are going on that are wrong. Even in your own society, you should be trying to change it peacefully if you can. And if you feel that you're so persecuted,
then you create a pie.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's right. Well, at least it wasn't a sword or something like that,
Which it would have been in some other countries.
Yeah, that's why the parliamentarians had to remove their swords in old English times.
I think Eric's point a little bit earlier though is very important, separating that which your religion requires you to do and that which your religion allows you to do. So on the one hand, I think we can quite happily go along with a law that says you're not going to marry a daughter off at 13 years of age. But on the other hand, to say to a Muslim you cannot pray 5 times a day, that would be wrong.
That's right.
Yes, absolutely.
Correct, yeah, you did right.
Yeah, I want Muslims to pray 5 times a day. I'd like them to pray more than that, like us.
Well, continually. Were you going to say something? You had your hand up.
No, I didn't.
I saw it.
I went like
Is
that.
there another?
I'm sorry, right.
So here's another example, of course, that the Catholic, Archbishop or Bishop in Tasmania sends a message to his churches and says this is the view of Christian marriage in the Roman Catholic Church, and he's taken to court for discrimination. That's where surely there is a conflict.
Yes.
Was he?
Yes.
Yes.
Shocking.
No, well, that doesn't sound right.
It's not right.
No, because it is.
By who?
A Greens leader.
Yeah.
Did he lose or win?
I think it was dropped.
He was dropped.
Yeah, because he would have lost it.
Yes.
Yeah.
But as
So it's his right to do that, but the courts showed, to me, that shows the power of and that's a Roman system, that the judges are independent of the state. There's so much we do owe the Romans, or some things like taxes and bureaucracy. That bureaucracy is theirs. The way we run our state is pure Roman, and the judges, the way the judges are independent of the state, and that all citizens, Roman citizens, have equal rights under that law, is actually Roman, very Roman.
Yeah.
But not everyone has equal access to the law, because by the time you've paid
Well, you
your
didn't have it in
lawyers-
Roman times either, but
But by the time you've paid your lawyers, the cost and stress of being sued or taken to court or whatever the thing is enormous. And I mean, Bill Leak has died recently, and it may be
Who's he?
coincidence, but he
was a
was
cartoonist.
being
Bill Leak,
criticised
yeah, okay.
incredibly
Oh, sorry, yeah,
greatly
right,
for
yeah.
some of his cartoons. And he died far younger than you'd expect a person like him to die. There was no real obvious reason for him to die. And some of us wonder if it might have been the stress of being sued for...
some of his cartoons of Julia Gillard were obscene. I've seen them. I've seen on the net. They were beyond acceptable standards of our society.
Certainly, absolutely.
And you're defending a person that drew those.
Yes, I am. I'm defending his freedom of speech, and I'm saying that
Wow.
I think the stress of him being
So
sued...
you don't mind Muslims having freedom of speech then?
No, I don't mind Muslims having
Okay,
freedom of speech.
good, all right.
Of course not, freedom of speech is very important,
All right.
and I never said anything against freedom of speech.
I think the particular ones that brought up of his were not that bad, but possibly...
The ones I've seen are pretty bad.
But
Julia
just-
Gillard copped it.
They were obscene. They were
I've
truly
seen
obscene.
some of his, and,
Yeah.
and I'm not defending the cartoons, and that I shouldn't be asked if I am. It's an irrelevancy. I'm saying that this guy was taken to court, and the stress of being taken to
Yeah,
court
but see-
may have contributed to his early
But
death.
see, he's broken. This is the point where you.
Court is a reasonable place for him to be taken.
Exactly right. But also, there is certain. We have the right to free speech, but we don't have the right to defame a person. So there's a grey area that the law recognises, and it's extremely grey.
I think
And
we've
we shouldn't do
got
that.
to
All right. It's getting
Oh,
quite.
just like that.
Just like that.
Just like that.
All right.
Because it's in past,
This is the statement
we
of the
turn into
Pumpkins,
at
9
if we
o'clock.
go past 9 o'clock.
All right, so I can see that I've definitely, the debate has gone the way I thought it might be, because it is truly, yeah.
I actually
Because
thought
it
we'd
is,
spend more time talking about, you know, hal as a new tax. Anyway,
but that's
so
part of it,
that's
see, because it is part of people's perception of how the church and state should go. So I deliberately brought in the history part of it so that we could relate to. It's not much different than what the history's shown that we're in now, really, other than maybe our society is a bit more tolerant.